Hey everyone, and welcome to this month's live event with Heather Thomas. Once again, she's back to answer all of your quilting questions. Thanks so much for being here, Heather.
Thanks for having me. Hi, everybody.
All right, we're going to get started right away with a question here from Janie. And she says, regarding what you've said about cutting borders slightly shorter, do you sew the border on with the pieced quilt on top or with the border on top? Thank you, and I have enjoyed rewatching each of these monthly events. You have shared so much valuable information.
Well, I'm glad that you're enjoying it, and I'm really glad that you're getting some information that you can use. Logic would say that you would put that border on the bottom, but I'm too lazy to do that. So I put the border on the top. And so what I do is I find the middle of the border and I find the middle of the quilt, and I put a pin right there and pin those two together. And then I pin the two ends. And so there's just a tiny little bit of tautness with the border itself. As you sew, by the time you get to the middle, there's no tautness left at all. And by the time you get to the end, you're doing a little bit of easing, even though that border was cut a ½ inch or a ¼ inch too small. So I only do those 3 pins, one in the middle, one on each end, and I just get going. So border on top, much easier to do.
Perfect. All right, next question here. This is from Shoshana, and she says, I seem to be asking this question over and over again, but somehow I just don't get it. When I want to quilt my quilt, is it enough just to baste it, or should I then run rows of stabilizing stitches up and down and across, and then quilt where I want? Thanks once again for all your generous sharing of information and help.
Shosh, if you are listening, I would like you to get back to us and tell me about your sewing machine. Because if you're battling with this process, it could be something that's going on between you and your machine. It could be your relationship with your machine. So if I knew a little bit more about it, I could kind of problem solve with that. But I'm going to kind of go back and reiterate here that doing a stabilizing in the ditch sort of grid is really old school when it comes to machine quilting. And it is something that we did back in the day when we weren't quilting very close together. Now, when we quilt really close together, the density of about 1 inch, 1½ inches apart, even a ½ inch apart or 3/4 of an inch apart, that amount of density that we know is good for the quilt, it's going to make the quilt last a long time. When we do that, if we were to go in and sew in a grid beforehand, we would get in trouble. We would have some fullness where we wouldn't want it and some tautness where we wouldn't want it. So generally speaking, we don't sew that grid anymore. Again, that's old school. If you're having problems still, one of the things that could be taking place is that you have too much pressure on your presser foot, and that could be your machine. If your machine doesn't have a free motion foot that is made specifically for it, and you're having to use a generic one, that can cause some problems. And one of the things that you can do is go ahead and lower your feed dogs if you aren't lowering them. If you have the option of changing your presser foot pressure, you can lessen that pressure so that you have more room between the foot and the bed of the machine so that your quilt can move more freely. It could be that you're using a batting that is doing a lot of creeping, because some battings creep more than others. And so if your batting has anything slick in it, and slick things are definitely polyester, but wool can be a little bit slick, and so can silk. Cotton is the least slick of all the battings, and so it seems to move or creep the least amount. And it could be that you're simply not basting enough, that your basting pins aren't close enough. Basically, the width of my fist is, I want a pin on each side of my fist when I put it down on my quilt. So it's about every 3 to 3½ inches I put a pin. And if I see that I'm running into trouble, if I see that I'm getting some fullness, if I see that I'm getting some puckers, I'll go in and throw a whole bunch of pins in that area that's having some problems and very slowly sew that area. Because one of the things that I know that I think that you probably haven't realized yet is that I am the boss of every stinking thing in my studio. Nothing is the boss of me. The quilt is not the boss of me. The machine is not the boss of me. And I refuse to let those things get the best of me. I am going to wrangle them and get the best of them because I'm the boss of everything in my studio. It's the only place on the whole face of the earth that I am the boss of everything. It's one of the main reasons I like to spend time in there. if you adopt that attitude that you're not going to let that quilt get the best of you, it's going to change your way of looking at things, and hopefully make you kind of take the bull by the horns and not put up with that crap. Let's either have you get back to us later in the hour and tell us what machine you have and see if I can problem solve with that, or baste closer together, more pins, more pins. Slow down, quit going so fast. Everybody thinks they have to go pedal to the metal, and then they kind of feel out of control. Check out that batting, and when you set your batting between two pieces of fabric, if it moves and shifts like this all the time, then that batting is problematic. If it holds on to the fabrics, then that's a good batting. That's a batting that's going to help you machine quilt more better. Love that English. Anyway, hopefully one of these things will help, or all of these things will help, or you'll get back to us with information about your sewing machine if you've already tried all these things, and we might be able to address your relationship with your machine.
Perfect, absolutely. So this next question here is gonna kind of just touch on something you just said, but I think she might have just tuned in. This is from Shirley, and she says, I've always been told to stitch in the ditch for every stinking seam in the quilt. Is that old school or still good advice? Seems to stabilize the quilt well, but I'm sure it takes a lot of work and I am lazy.
It is old school, and I have said it time and time again, and I believe it with every part of my being, that ditches are for drunks, not for quilters. We do not need to be quilting in the ditch. The ditch is a hard place to stitch in. The color changes all the time, the fabric color, so you're not sure what color thread to use. It's hard to stay in the ditch. Your machine wants to ride up all the time, and no, get out of the ditch. You don't need to be in the ditch. What you need is to come up with ideas and ways of stitching your quilt that you can quilt it with a modicum of regularity and a density that's going to make your quilt last every, half inch all the way up to every inch and a half or so, and you're going to be good to go. And get the heck out of that ditch. It's not a good place.
It's like my favorite place to quilt.
I know.
All right. Our next question here, this is from Patricia, and she says, I am making a baby quilt for my niece's new baby. Would the quilt be successful if I mix flannel and quilting cotton in the top?
There's no reason why it shouldn't, but not all flannels are created equal. When you go shopping for flannels, try to find the ones that are a little bit on the thinner side if you're going to use them with regular quilters cottons. If you use the really thick, heavy flannels, then they don't really sit very well in highly pieced designs. If you're just doing something like 6-inch blocks, it probably won't make a difference. But that flannel will also, build up in the seam allowance too. So you end up with a thicker, chunkier seam allowance. So if you're doing half square triangles, it could be problematic for you. But if you're doing something like 6-inch squares, it's not a big deal. Luckily, most of the flannels that are quote unquote baby style or baby designs are the thinner flannels. And so then you shouldn't have a problem. So, but definitely pre-wash those babies, because flannel shrinks a lot more than regular cotton. So you want it to do all that shrinking before you put those two together.
Absolutely. And now you mentioned the bulkier seam allowances. When you're piecing with something like flannel or a thicker fabric, do you increase your seam allowance at all or keep it at a 1/4 inch?
I keep it at a 1/4 inch still. Yeah, I want to keep it as small as I can get away with.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right, our next question here, this is from Joan, and she says, when I make large quilts, I really struggle trying to keep all of the ripples out of the front and back with my sandwich. I pin, flip, repin, flip, repin several times. Is there an easier way?
Well, stop that flipping. I have never flipped a quilt. Don't flip anymore. Are you stretching your backing fabric? First of all, it's important that your backing fabric is taut. And that will really help you keep from having any puckers or pleats on the back of your quilt. So you want to stretch that backing fabric so that it's taut enough that you can still reach into the center and pick it up. But when you pick it up and drop it, it makes a little popping sound. So it's tight enough to make that popping sound, but not so tight that you can't pick it up. If it's so loose that when you pick it up, it just kind of flops down, then it's not stretched enough. Don't pull it out of its widthwise or lengthwise grain. You don't want to have some, weird pulling in there, but just nice and taut. So if it's a baby quilt or a lap quilt, that's easy going. If it's a bigger quilt, you're going to have to do a little bit at a time on a big table and then, move it and do it again. Find yourself some binder clips, big, chunky binder clips that will fit around the edge of your table. so that you can use those to clamp that backing down. If you don't have that, if your table's really wide and you can't get wide enough binder clips, then use electrical tape to tape your backing down. Electrical tape is the stickiest of all the tapes when it comes to fabric. Some of the duct tapes are nice and sticky, but it's hit or miss. You'll buy one time and it's nice and sticky. You'll buy the same brand the next time and it's some deviation from the last one you bought and it's not nearly as sticky. But electrical tape, that's some sticky stuff. So it's a great one to use when you're, holding down that backing fabric. And then smooth out your batting and smooth out your top. You should never fold up your top and flip it over. You should not be flipping anything. You should smooth out the center of your top, put in 5 or 6 pins, smooth out the next area that's about 12 inches square, put in pins there, smooth out the next area, put in pins there. And from that center, just keep smoothing out areas and putting in pins. If you've covered your whole table with pins and you have to move your quilt before you can get to the next area because your table isn't big enough, then you're going to make sure that the portion that is pinned is going to be, the whole 3 layers is going to be pulled in with the binder clips on one side or taped down. Then you're going to smooth out the area that's not pinned and pin it. Now, if I am quilting a bed-size quilt, I generally want to send my quilt to a long arm quilter to baste for me. And I'll have her baste it every 6 inches in both directions with a really big stitch length so it's easy to pull out later. It's been a long time since I've done a bed-size quilt, so I have no idea what they're charging these days, but 10 years ago they would charge me about $40 or $50. So to me that's worth it because basting is a booger. But if it's a 70-inch square quilt, I'm going to do it myself and I'm going to pin baste the centermost part that I'm going to quilt first, or a center row that I'm going to quilt first, whatever I'm quilting first. And then I'm going to smooth everything out, push all that top out to the edges, and then I'm going to put big safety pins along the edges just to hold those 3 layers together. Then after I've quilted that center part, I'm going to take all those pins out. I'm going to set it back down the table. I'm not stretching anything because I've already stretched stuff. And I'm going to smooth that top over. And if I have to move that safety pin, because I've pushed the fabrics during the quilting, I'll move just the safety pin in that area that's along the edge, and I'll put pins in that area. And I'll just keep doing that because I don't want to pin a whole 70-inch square quilt. I'm going to have those pins poking me left and right and falling out and all that. But if I pin every 3 inches, I am not going to get any pleats or puckers on the top or the back. If I'm only pinning every 6 inches, who knows what can happen? If I've pieced poorly, who knows what can happen? Then I'm going to get puckers and pleats on the front. If I've basted poorly, meaning I haven't stretched my backing fabric, then I'm likely to get puckers and pleats on the back. So baste properly, pin, pin, pin. And then you're going to have, kind of no problems when it comes to the quilting.
I don't even want to know how many pins you probably have in your sewing room, like probably.
Well, I buy the can. It's a can of silk pins with 10,000 pins in it. And for a while there, I was buying a can about every 3 years.
Oh, wow.
Because they break. They're very thin and fine. They break, yeah. Most people buy a can of 500 about every year that use them for basting. Mm-hmm. And they're like $8. It's an $8 investment every year. Who cares? Big deal.
Yeah. Well, so for a smaller scale demonstration of how to pin baste your quilt, we do have a video on the site where Heather shows how to smooth out the back and do everything she just said, but on a much smaller scale. So if you need, for a visual person, definitely check out that video. All right, our next question here, this is from Nancy, and she says, Heather, I love these live events. I am in awe of your art quilt projects. Can you recommend a source for the fancy fabrics to add to my stash? Someplace where they sell grab bags would be great. And then she says, keep up the inspirational videos. You are why I keep my membership at National Quilter Circle going.
Ah, well, thank you very much. I wish I could give you an answer for that because I have to be honest with you, I couldn't find those fabrics, so I bought them white and dyed them myself and sold them to other people. I used to sell grab bags and all that too. I don't do that anymore. And I honestly can't tell you anybody who I know that does. But my suggestion is this, is find in your town, if it's a small town, you're probably not going to find it, find in the next larger town, find a store that sells fabrics for people who make their own high-end clothing. And like here in my area, I'm back in Colorado now, and there is a beautiful, beautiful store in Boulder called Elfrida's. And she sells some of the most exquisite silk fabrics you are ever going to find. And I used to go in there and buy 3 inches by the width of the fabric of a silk that was $98 a yard. And, or I'd buy, you know, 6 inches of something, and she would just shake her head at me, because I'd end up spending $200 or $300, but I'd end up with 12 or 14 fabrics and just a little bit of all of them. And then I showed her one time what I did with them, and she went, oh, I understand. She's this beautiful German lady. So that's my suggestion, is to go to a fancy fabric shop. And there, if you ever travel to Taos, there's a store there called Common Thread. Oh my goodness, the silks they have there, out of this world. But I don't know any quilt shops that are doing this sort of thing. So your best bet is a fancy fabric store. Not one that necessarily sells just stuff for weddings, because they're not going to get enough color or variation. But one that sells high-end fabrics for garment making. And look for silks or wovens, anything that when you pull on it from side to side, there isn't too much stretch. When it actually feels like a cotton in its movement, but not necessarily in its texture. It can be really silky, it can be really nubby, it can be all those wonderful fun things. But that's probably going to be your best source. If you want to, however, you can go to a place called Joann Fabrics, and they have this wonderful little section in their store with white cottons that have all sorts of wonderful embroidery on them and cut work on them, and they're all 100% cotton. And we used to buy about 5 or 6 of those different fabrics and dye them. And if you don't want to dye them, you can dye paint them, which is, you can just get a product called Dynaflow, D-Y-E-N-A-F-L-O-W. It's a paint that has a lot of pigment in it, and it acts like a dye. And you simply mix it with equal parts water, and you dip the fabric in there, wring it out really, really well, and just lay it out to dry. If you lay it flat, it dries slightly mottled. If you lay it all crumpled up, it dries really mottled. And then when you heat set it, it becomes permanent. So you can dye your own with a paint rather than a dye. You don't have to go through the whole dyeing process. And so that's a way that you can start building up your cotton fabrics that are really funky and different. And I loved those fabrics. And so, you know, just, you have to search. You have to search. I searched for years and years and years. I was constantly searching for wonderful, fabulous fabrics.
Well, and I guess, like you said, if you search and you can't find it, then just do it yourself.
Do it yourself, yeah.
All right, next question here. This is from Deborah. I'm not sure if this is 100% up your alley, but you might be able to give her some direction here. She says, I'm looking for a good long arm quilting machine, quilt frame, with the ability to have the software to help me quilt. Can you direct me to some good reviews for long arm quilt machines and frames?
Well, I would simply Google long arm quilting reviews, or I would go to KarenMcTavish.com. Karen McTavish is, in my opinion, one of the best long arm quilters out there, and definitely one of the best teachers. She's written a couple books on her technique called McTavishing, which isn't my favorite thing, because I think it's a little too decorative, but she does it well. But she has probably maybe a little bit more opinionated than me, which is saying a whole lot. A very delightful woman, and she has a blog, and she has all kinds of information. So it's MC, capital T-A-V-I-S-H, Karen McTavish. She has wild dreadlocks and tattoos and rides a motorcycle, and is an amazing quilter. So she's a great source for long arming. So if you get in touch with her website, that's somebody who is probably going to be able to lead you in a good direction. It's such a big question, because, I have to say to you, are you thinking of spending, $9,000, or are you thinking of spending $30,000? Because there's this huge range there. Bernina has some great long arm machines out now that are just amazing, but you're talking $30,000. Or you can get, for about $9,000, you can get a Tin Lizzie. But it's a PVC pipe frame, which isn't all that great. And so some people upgrade the frame, blah, blah, blah. There's just so many options. If you also Google Long Arm Quilters Forum, forums out there where long arm quilters are talking about their machines all the time. And then another thing is to go to a big show. If you go to a big state quilt show, Minnesota has one coming up, California has them all the time, Colorado has them all the time, Houston, of course, if you go to festival, all the big makers are there, and you can stand in front of those machines and use them. And you can actually do, a machine by machine testing. And that is fabulous. If you can go and try the big three and see, which one you like the most of. But here is the absolute most important thing I can tell you about buying a long arm is that, as with any expensive sewing machine, when you buy that machine, you are buying that dealership. You're buying that dealership. They are your service people. So if the closest dealership is 3,000 miles away from you, that is not the machine for you. If there isn't somebody within 100 miles or so that can come and teach you how to use that machine and can service that machine, then that is not the machine for you. You need to make sure that you have the support system in place to help you use that machine. I cannot tell you how many people I know who have bought long arm machines that those machines sit there and don't get used because they are intimidated by them. They don't have the service for them. They don't have somebody who's taught them how to use them. And they're just, a total waste of their money. So consider who you're buying it from. Make sure you like them. Make sure they're ethical. Make sure they're going to give you what you need. And that is just as important as whatever brand you end up buying.
That's a good, I didn't even think about it. I wouldn't even have thought about something like that when buying a machine. But yeah, you're right. Because it's not like you can just pack it up in your car and take it in.
No.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So perfect. Awesome. All right, our next question here, we got this one a little bit ago and you talked about it. You talk about synthropol a lot in terms of pre-washing your fabric, but someone wanted to know about pre-washing their pre-cut fabrics like charm packs or jelly rolls, and they put them in laundry bags, and whether or not synthropol would still work with that.
Absolutely. In fact, I was really excited when I heard her question and she talked about how she was washing them in laundry bags, because that's one of the problems that all these pre-cuts kind of give us, is that it makes them a little bit difficult to pre-launder. And everybody knows that, I'm a launderer. I want to know what that fabric's going to do. I want to be familiar with it. I want to be intimate with it. I want to know what's going on with it before I put it in a quilt that I put all my hard, time and energy. And so I think it's brilliant that this customer or this quilter is putting those in laundry bags, different sizes of laundry bags. And yes, synthropol. Synthropol is simply a detergent. It's just like any other detergent you can think of, only it has a surfactant in it that pulls out excess dye and holds onto it. There are no other things in the market that I know of that will do that. There might be some things out there. Somebody might, teach me something new, and I love that. But as far as I know, it is the only product that will pull out excess dye and suspend it in the water so it can't go back down on any of the fabrics in the washing machine. It says it has to be used with hot water. And a lot of people are afraid to use hot water on their cotton fabrics. But let's face it, let's get our fabrics to shrink as much as they're going to at the get-go so that they don't do it later and misshapen our quilts. Our battings don't shrink very much anymore. And if our fabrics are shrinking and our batting isn't shrinking, then we have issues. If our fabrics aren't shrinking and our batting is shrinking, then we have issues. So let's just shrink all of our fabrics, let them be as shrunk as they can be. Our battings, most of them only shrink 1% these days because they're so well made. When I first started quilting, they were not well made. Now they are. And so, synthropol, use that stuff. It's wonderful. Wash all your clothes in it. It's great.
Wash everything.
It's good stuff.
Okay.
And it's cheap.
Perfect. Awesome. All right, our next question here, this is from Mary Beth, and she says, feed dogs up or down for ruler quilting?
For what quilting?
Ruler quilting.
Now see, I'm going to tell you a little bit about ruler quilting. I know very little about it. I was watching some videos the other day of ruler quilting going, well, I'll be damned. How come I didn't think of that? Maybe I would have made some money finally in the quilting world if I'd come up with all those rulers.
I was going to say, I think I've seen you do hundreds of videos and I have never seen you use a ruler.
Never used a ruler, never used a ruler. But I was watching somebody do these perfect arcs, and most of you know that I am not into perfection. But I was like going, oh, I understand these rulers now. I needed to understand what everybody was talking about with these rulers, and I was kind of in awe. So my question to you, I'm going to kind of throw a question back at you, is how are you quilting already? However you're quilting already is how you should quilt with your rulers, because they really don't change the game, except that they give you something to follow. And so it really has no impact on whether or not you prefer feed dogs up or feed dogs down. If I were going to start using rulers right now, I would do it with my feed dogs up, just like I already do.
Perfect. Just because this is the only person off the top of my head, because I've seen her do quilting before, but Gina Paris Perks with the copper needle designs, she even has, I think, some of her own rulers, and she does long arm quilting, but she does some really, see, I like perfection, like amazing, perfect, not out of place at all things. So that's somebody who I've watched her do a lot of ruler work. So Gina Perks would be a good one to look into for that. But
there you go.
All right, our next question here, this is from Alice, and she says, how to quote someone a price for a full-size t-shirt quilt?
Okay, well, you need to, there's two different aspects of having somebody pay you to work. And one is cost of goods, and the other is time. So is she going to be providing all the fabrics, the t-shirts, the backing fabric, the sashing fabric, the batting, the backing fabric, the thread to piece with, and the thread to quilt with? And are you quilting it, or are you just piecing it? So all those things are important. And so if you're purchasing any of those things for her, so if she's going to just give you the t-shirts and you're going to do everything else, then you need to take the cost of goods, what it costs you to purchase those things, you know, $75 for backing fabric, and batting and thread, and you double it. And the reason we double is because you have to go and get it and you have to prepare it. So whatever art you're making, as a jeweler, as a painter, as a whatever, it's cost of goods sold ×2. And then your time. Now, depending on what part of the country you live in, your time is worth a different amount of money. Isn't that funny? But it's the way it is. If you live in a big city, then your time is worth, you know, about $30 an hour. If you live in a tiny town in Minnesota or backwoods Texas or Alabama, then your time is worth anywhere between $10 and $15 an hour. When I bill somebody, I bill at $30 an hour. I am not doing anything ever in my whole life ever again for less than $30 an hour when it comes to work. I've been a full-time artist for 30 years, and I believe that I'm worth $30 an hour. So, you know, if somebody comes to me and says, I would like you to make me a t-shirt quilt, I would say, really? And I go, okay, well, I really like you, or I have nothing else to do, or whatever. I don't know what I would say to make a t-shirt quilt, but I would say, okay, well, it's probably going to take me this much time to prepare the t-shirts. I have to put the iron-on backing on them, cut out the designs, and then it's going to take me this much time to piece the quilt, and then it's going to take me this much time to baste the quilt, and it's going to take me this much time to quilt the quilt, and then it's going to take me this much time to put the binding on the quilt. And then I'm going to take that amount and add 30% more time, because we always underestimate. And then I'm going to say, you know, this is this is how much it's going to cost. This is I'm not going to break it down. I'm just going to say it's going to be $900 or whatever, because I put my time in there. And yes, if I'm most people will say, okay, well, I'm going to charge them, you know, $20 an hour for the piecing, but only $10 an hour for the basting, because you know, anybody could baste. Well, anybody might be able to baste, but I'm having to do it, and my time is very valuable. So that is up to you. Most people undervalue their work. Very few people charge what is fair to them. Most people who have to pay for something begrudge the amount that they pay for it. So it is almost never a wonderful experience for everybody involved. But I say, if you're going to do it, get your money's worth. And if somebody's going to ask you to pay for something, give them their money's worth. Don't do it for free, you know, unless they're your best friend, you know. Yeah, make sure that you keep in mind cost of goods sold ×2 and your time.
Absolutely. Two things. I think first, I love how there's no question ever whether you like something or you don't like something. You can tell whether you don't like t-shirt quilts.
You know what? I just T-shirt quilts just they're just not my thing. T-shirts aren't my thing. I have never worn a T-shirt, and I've never been who's into T-shirts. And I'm not somebody who wants to wear their life on their chest, I guess, you know. And so I'm just not a T-shirt person. And I know that, and they can look really, really shabby, but they can look pretty cool. But most of them look really shabby. They're just not, you know, they're not high-end quilting.
That's true, but they are. Yeah. I think they're perfect for, you know, going off to college, for kids, for the.
They are. They're wonderful for memorabilia. Absolutely. And I'm a memorabilia person. I don't have any memorabilia, so you know, it's just so not me. But I know a lot of people love them, and that's good. Whatever floats your boat, do it.
Absolutely. And then just about, you're talking about people undervaluing their work. I also think it's kind of a fear thing for people being able to say, oh, it's going to be $900, and be afraid that someone's going to say, oh, it's too much. So I don't know, how do you get over something?
Well, I don't know, you know, I don't know if some of you guys know this, but I do a lot of jewelry making these days. And I had somebody contact me, somebody who used to be a student of mine contacted me and said, you know, I have these stones and I'd like you to make some jewelry with them. And I was like, okay, what do you want? She told me what she wanted. And I said, that's going to be $1,000. And she went, oh, okay. That was that.
Yeah.
And I made good money, and she paid me the good money. And when I gave her the stuff, she was like, this is fabulous. And everybody was happy. It was one of those few times where everybody was happy. And it was great. And because you know what, if she had said, oh, that's too much, I would say, keep your stuff and have somebody else make it.
Yeah, you might as well ask for it. You might get it.
I'm busy.
All right. All right, next one here. We've had a couple questions about this before, and some recent questions too, about how do you quilt red work quilts or quilt blocks that have some sort of embroidery or something on them?
You know, that is one of the tougher things. Back in the day, they were usually hand quilted with a diagonal grid. Okay, so that is the most common way embroidered quilts and cross stitching and those sorts of things were done, was with a diagonal grid about every ½ inch, maybe 3/4 inch, maybe even an inch. Using hand quilting. These days, what a lot of people will do is they'll take the design. So let's say that you've got a block that has a rooster stitched on it in red work. So that's red embroidery floss, and it's mostly a back stitch or something. One of the things that you can do is you can outline the shape first and put in some gesture lines. Now, gesture lines are lines that are done in drawing or quilting or whatever that give the illusion of something. The definition of the wing of the rooster, the definition of his little thing that hangs off his neck, whatever that's called, that little wobbly thing, or his head feathers or whatever. Those are called gesture lines. And you could do that. And then choose something that you're going to quilt in the background of every single block. It could be something as simple as a stipple. It could be a crosshatch, a wavy crosshatch. It could be, you know, whatever. But you simply outline each of those designs in the very simple outline with a few gesture lines in them. What you don't want to do is get in there and put a lot of quilting inside that that stitched area and confuse the eye of the viewer between the quilting line and the stitching line. You want the stitching line to be the thing, the hand stitching, the hand embroidery, and the quilting to be it, go in there and simply define it. Define it, okay? So if it's really ornate stitching, which most hand stitching is, don't overwhelm it with decorative quilting. Simplicity, simplicity. That's why our foremothers knew so much. They knew that on point or diagonal crosshatch was going to be hold that puppy together and not overwhelm that beautiful stitching.
Perfect. All right, next question here. This is from Grace, and she says, if I use Synthropol in pre-washing my fabrics, which will get rid of the excess dye, do I still need to use Retain to set colors that have the tendency to run like reds?
Well, you know, the thing about Retain is if you ever talk to the makers of Retain, what Retain was designed to do was not to set colors like reds. What Retain was designed to do was to keep old fabrics from fading more. And that was its original design, the original reason for being brought into the quilting world. If you're using Synthropol and your water does not run clear when you do your final rinse, because I usually rinse things twice when I use any type of detergent, because there's always little bits of detergent left in there. So if it doesn't run clear, when I open it up and it's just about to start spinning out the water in that final spin, if it's, you know, pink and there's a lot of red in there, I'm going to rinse it again. And I'm going to rinse it again. And if there's still pink, then I'm going to go ahead and wash it again with that Synthropol. Pull out more excess dye. And I'm going to wash it until there's no excess dye pulled out into that rinse. Because what happens is let's say I've made a quilt for Susie Q. It's got those reds in it. I washed it with Synthropol. Then I washed it with Retain, and I pushed in that excess dye with Retain. It's only going to push it in until it gets wet again. Because then Susie Q washes it. She doesn't use Retain or Synthropol, and all the reds run. So unless you plan on giving the person you make the quilt for a little bottle of Retain and say the quilt should always be washed with this, or a little bottle of Synthropol, quilt should, you know, I told people all the time, if you've ever washed one of my quilts, you need to wash it with Synthropol. So it was washed with in the beginning. It's what it should be washed with for the rest of its life, as far as I'm concerned. So I don't know that Retain is necessarily the answer. I think laundering it again in the Synthropol is a better answer.
Gotcha.
Pull out that excess dye instead of pushing it back in.
Absolutely. And then you only have to buy the one product anyway.
Exactly. Exactly.
Perfect. All right, next question here. Someone would like to make a quilt out of vintage hankies, and they want to know if you have any suggestions on how to deal with the hankies.
Well, the hankies should behave, if they're cotton hankies, which most of the vintage hankies are, they should behave basically like cotton fabrics. However, they generally are quite a bit thinner. And so I've known a lot of people who will buy what's called cotton baste, B-A-T-I-S-T-E. And you can get it at some of the big box fabric stores, depending on what town, how big your town is. You can certainly get it online. It's a very thin cotton. And people will stitch their, just around the outside edge of their hankies, stitch it directly to the baste and cut the baste out, and then piece those two together as they piece. And then when they quilt, they're of course going to quilt through all those layers. And what that baste does is it gives a really nice lightweight backing. Some people will put a non-woven iron-on permanent interfacing on the back of those hankies, but that needs to be the lightest weight that you can find. You don't want to add bulk to it, and that's why the baste is so nice. Otherwise, you can say I'm only going to use hankies that have the same hand to them that quilters cotton has. I'm going to go for the heftier hankies instead of the lighter weight hankies. Some people like to sew, if a hanky has a beautiful decorative edge to it, they like to sew it onto a bigger piece of fabric, and some people will use muslin for that, and they'll sew all of their 8-inch hankies or 9-inch hankies onto 12-inch blocks of white muslin and use that kind of as a background, and then piece them together with some sort of sashing or whatever. There are some great books out there for designs using vintage hankies. So you can always just Google vintage hanky quilts, and you're going to come up with 1,000,001 visuals and books for that too.
Perfect. All right, our next question here. When creating a landscape quilt, how do you identify how big or little each section should be so everything is in proportion?
Ah, very good. I used to teach this very fun class called Landscape Architecture, and I would not let people draw their landscape to size so that they could use templates. I just thought it was a waste of time. I still think it's a waste of time. There's a wonderful, wonderful little trick. 90% of the time when you make a landscape, you're working off of a photograph. It could be a photograph that you took. It could be a picture from a magazine or from a calendar or something like that. So I'm going to assume that you have a photograph that you're going to be working out of. And there's this just wonderful, wonderful technique that you can use. And I'm not a mathematical genius, but I have to admit that I did come up with this. And the first time I did it is because I wanted to make some quilts that resembled Ansel Adams' photographs. I'm from the area of Yosemite National Park, and I love Ansel Adams' work. I think he's one of the best photographers when it comes to composition, and composition's my thing with quilting. So what I learned is that if I had a picture that was 5 inches by 8 inches, then I would basically blow that up to a size that I wanted to work with. So if it was 5 inches by 8 inches and I wanted it to be 15 inches by 18 inches, that would be that I blew both sides up by the number 3. 5 times 3 is 15. 5 times 8, excuse me, 3 times 8 is 18. So that would be 15 by 18, which is a nice size. It's rectangular, which is always good for a landscape. So my magic number has now become 3. So if in my photograph, my original photograph, the little bushes that are closest to me are 1.5 inches, I'm going to multiply that by 3. So now they are 3.5, or whatever that is. 3 times 1.5 inches. So
I would need a calculator for this whole process.
The background are 3 inches tall. I'm going to multiply that by 3. So now they're 9 inches tall. So that becomes my magic number. And it is the most fabulous way that I know of to achieve and maintain the scale that is already present in my landscape picture. But let's say you're going to just come up with your own landscape. You've got no picture, or you've got several pictures you want to look at. Remember that the things that are closest to you in a landscape are the things that are closest to life size. The things that are farthest away from you in a landscape are the things that are smallest, because as things go away, perspective-wise, they diminish. So things that are closest to me are always going to be at the bottom portion of a landscape, because that is what we are walking into, is the bottom of the quilt. And the things that are farthest away are going to be on the top of that landscape, because that is what's pushed away in a landscape in a quilt. So hopefully these things help. Landscapes can be a kick in the butt to do. They're very, very fun. So use that magic number thing, and I think you'll be very surprised. And just to give you a heads up, it is one of the next classes I'll be filming in a couple months. So it won't be long before that landscape architecture class will be on the website.
Perfect. And just because I'm curious and I missed it and I don't know, what were the classes that you did recently just film, so we can give them kind of a preview of what may be coming up?
Oh, let's see. I did one that's used to be very, very popular when I taught, called Edges and Finishes, which has 17 different ways to finish the edges of your quilts.
Wow, okay.
What else did I do? I did swirly do quilts, which is a very fun technique of doing trees. And so if you're into trees, it's got a fabulous dimensional trunk on it, and ripped fabric as stitched on swirls that make up the bows or boughs, however you say it, of the trees. And I can't remember the others.
Okay, well, when we see what those are, we'll definitely talk about them when they come up.
Yeah, sorry, get them up.
All right, that actually goes into our next question here. What is the biggest difference between cutting and tearing your fabric, and when should one be used over another?
Well, you know, I would love to say that it's the same thing, but it ain't. And unfortunately, so many fabrics are being made by companies who, for whatever reason, have cut corners and are using a lower quality gray goods. And I believe that gray is spelled G-R-E-I-G-E. And that is the base fabric that a fabric is printed on. And a lot of times those gray goods these days have a thread count as little as 40 by 40 threads per inch, which is not very tight. And when those fabrics are ripped, you will end up with what's called a traveling white. So you rip it, and white lines will travel into the rip anywhere from a ½ inch, sometimes up to 1 inch. And so those fabrics cannot be ripped and used very well, very easily. Batiks, wonderful for ripping. There are a few name brands of fabric that, you know, continue to be fabulous to rip. There are other name brands of fabric that, oh, they just don't work with ripping at all. So I believe that probably the only time that I myself will spend a lot of time ripping is if I'm freeform piecing and freeform layering fabrics. Then I really don't care how those edges look, because it's all about the texture. or if I'm doing borders. If I am doing an 8-inch wide border of all one fabric on a bed-size quilt, I am going to buy a fabric that I can rip. For me, it's the only way I know I'm going to get it really true to the grain, and that means my border is not going to ripple. And so, especially if I cut it a 1/4 inch too short. If you cut it, there's so many mistakes that can be made along the way that can cause that border to ripple. And so I really like ripping my borders. I don't have to rip anything else, but if I'm making a bed-size quilt, I want to be able to rip those borders. So I'm very careful with my fabrics when I buy them. And if you're going to spend, $45 for border fabric, tell them that you want to buy a little 1/8 of an inch, and 1/8 of a yard, and rip that puppy first and make sure that it doesn't do that little white traveling line. And so that you don't have that issue. But other than that, most of the time we're going to cut, especially if we're doing a lot of exact piecing. The cutting is important. It's pretty hard to do exact piecing with ripped fabrics because they stretch when you rip them. So, yeah.
Gotcha. All right, perfect. Okay, our next question here says, I have 2 vintage quilt tops that my husband's grandmothers and great-grandmothers made. They are hand-stitched. I need to add batting and backing fabric. What type of batting and backing fabric would you recommend?
Well, the batting I would recommend is a very thin cotton. So there's lots of different brands out there, but I would definitely go with a very thin cotton because that's what they would have used, number one. And then I would probably choose a backing fabric that matched the era that those fabrics came from. So if the era is from the 20s, 30s, 40s, then I would get, an Aunt Grace's, 20s, 30s, 40s fabric. If it was earlier, if it was turn of the century, then I would get a reproduction turn of the century fabric. And so I would enter those terms into a web search and find those fabrics. Depending on where you live, I can think of, in Colorado, I can think of somebody who carries, 1930s fabrics, 30s, 40s, and 50s. And so something that's similar and of a similar color. Your other option is to choose a solid from those quilts and buy a solid that's that color. The downside of that is that, with a solid, you're going to see every single stitch line you do with your quilting. And so if you're not a great quilter, then there's no way of hiding those mistakes on the back, and everybody's going to see everything that you do. It's kind of like, walking around with a sheer shirt on. But it's better than nothing when it comes to getting the right fabric. So
perfect.
Hopefully that helps.
Absolutely. All right. Our next question here is from Linda, and she says, back to the hand embroidered blocks. I'm just about to quilt squares that have been thread or needle painted embroidery in wildflowers. Should the crosshatch lines be brought right up to the embroidered design, or should I outline the whole flower and then quilt up to that line?
Outline the whole flower, then quilt up to that line. And then you can use that outline of the flower to double over when you need to, when you're doing that crosshatch. So yeah, outline the flower first, then do your crosshatch.
Perfect. All right. That was an easy one to answer. I expected a more elaborate response.
No, very simple.
Absolutely. Okay. Our next question here, someone says, thank you for teaching all of us. My question is, do you wash quilts and all of your clothing in hot water? I understand if it's a newly made quilt, but what about all the washings over the year, etc.? Does this damage quilts or clothing? Is it okay to use warm or cold water when using Synthropol?
That is a great question. I only use the hot water in the Synthropol when I first launder the fabric. After that, I always use warm. I'm a warm water washer, have been for a long, long time. Most garments these days can handle it with no problem, and certainly our quilts can handle it with no problem. The bigger problem with pre-aging your fabrics is drying too long. So the washing isn't going to do nearly as much damage as the heat from the dryer. So yes, I launder with Synthropol those quilts when I'm finished in warm water. And then I put them in the dryer just long enough to get the bulk of the wet out. The bulk of the wet. I don't let them get dry in there. The drying dulls the fabric. It fades the fabric. It's the culprit. So I pull it out of the dryer and I kind of very gently pull the quilt to square. meaning, you know, the edges being straight. And then I either drape it over something to dry or throw it on my floor and let the cat get all over it while it's drying. But that's how I finish drying things. If I have a line I can hang it on, I'll hang it from the line. But I won't hang it from a top edge. I will drape it over like 2 rows of a line so that it kind of drapes. And then I will halfway through that, turn the whole thing over again and drape it in the opposite direction. What you don't want to do is hang a wet quilt from one edge, because you're just going to end up with a big old, it's going to be a mess. So don't do that. Draping's better.
Perfect. All right, next question here. This is kind of a two-parter. But first, how do I get age marks out of a quilt that has been stored for too long? And then the second part of that is, how do you store your quilts?
Age marks as in fold lines? Is that what we're thinking?
It just says age marks. So it could be that. It could be, I don't know if things start to discolor with age, things like that.
Oh, I'm not sure what you're saying, so I'm gonna address both things. If you have rust or age marks that are like marked up the fabric and we don't know what they are, the very first thing I would suggest is that you very gingerly wash your quilt in Orvus, O-R-V-U-S, which is a horse wash. It's for washing farm animals. It's a very gentle but soapy, sudsy, cleaning, degreasing, but still gentle, surprisingly, soap. And a lot of quilt stores sell it, and a lot of online suppliers sell it. There's Grandma's Quilt Wash is another one that you can use. You can buy that at a lot of quilt stores. And these are things that are kind of manufactured to pull out old crap from your fibers of your quilts or whatever. So if that's what you're talking about, that's what I would launder with. However, if the quilt is very dull and dusty and dirty, then I would stick with Retain, because then you're going to keep the color nice, and then just live with those age marks. If you're talking about the marks that happen from folding, which is what I think you're talking about, because then you said, how do I store my quilts? Well, there's a couple of different ways that those can be removed. And the best way that I know of is buying or investing in a $30 cheap steamer that you steam garments with. And a steamer will take out 90% of the folds in a quilt, but it depends on the batting. Because one of the older cotton battings, sometimes once that crease is in there, there's no bringing it out, no matter how much steam you use. But steam is your best bet. If you don't want to invest in that, then you take your iron, you fill it full of water, you turn the steam on as high as it'll go, you turn the iron on as high as it'll go, and you lay your quilt flat on a surface, and you kind of hold that iron above the surface of the quilt and steam it. And after you've steamed it, it's a little bit damp, and then you push it with your hands and smooth out those wrinkles, and you let it dry. And if there's still wrinkles, there's still creases, you do it again. And you do it 2 or 3 times until they're gone. This can usually fix most things. Unfortunately, if you just iron where a fold mark is, you can make that fold mark even worse. So steam is really required. All of my art quilts are hung in my closets. They hang on, you know, the hangers that you hang pants on. If they're too big to hang, you know, just because they're small, they can just hang in the closet. I will roll them sort of kind of in thirds and hang the 3 layers, but there's no tight fold on the edge. They're just kind of rolled. If you have a lot of bed quilts and you don't know what to do with those, but you have a spare bed, then you can layer your quilts one on top of another on top of that mattress. 10 deep, 20 deep. Some people will put it between the mattress and the box spring. 10, 20 quilts. But if that bed gets a lot of use, if it's a guest bed, that's probably not your best bet. Some people will take those pool noodles, you know, those round things that people whack each other with in the pool, and they will make and this is important because they're polyurethane. You don't want to put your quilts directly on them. They will make a cover for them out of muslin, and then they will roll their quilts on those, and then make another cover out of muslin that's big enough to cover the whole quilt on the noodle. And then they stand them up in big buckets, big baskets in storage areas. There's all sorts of weird ways that we can do it. Some people will buy the acid-free tissue paper, lots of it, and they'll fold their quilt, and then they'll wrinkle up long pieces of the tissue paper and push it into the fold. And then they'll fold the quilt again and wrinkle up big pieces of tissue paper and put it into the fold. And so the quilt's folded, but it's got that tissue paper to kind of support the fold so that the fold doesn't flatten. And then they'll put it in a big box. And then the box keeps it from flattening also. And so you can buy these big boxes. If you have a lot of bed-size quilts and they have a higher loft batting, you can go to your dry cleaner and you can purchase from them for about $3 or $4 these big, massive hangers that when they wash somebody's duvet or their bedspread or whatever, they go on those. And I've seen people put tons and tons of batting on that bottom portion of the hanger, and then wrap it with muslin, and then drape their quilts over that, and then go in once or twice a year and fold it in the opposite direction, then drape it in the opposite direction. So there's just lots of different ways, but what you don't want to do is simply fold that puppy up and stack 10 of them deep and throw it in a drawer. You're going to end up with those fold lines, and that's not going to be good.
Absolutely.
Hopefully this helps.
Oh yeah. And I wouldn't have thought of the pool noodle one. I like that. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
All right, really quick question right here for you. Can you spell the detergent you named, please?
Synthrapol. Synthropol.
It's like you're in the spelling bee or something. Perfect. Okay. All right, we've got time for another question here. This is from Shelly, and she says, I have a large yo-yo quilt top from my grandmother. How would you suggest finishing it?
Yo-yo quilts usually aren't finished. There's no backing. There's no batting. They're really not a quilt. They're usually just yo-yos on their own. And so there is no finishing of a yo-yo quilt that I know of. However, I have seen people take two pieces of fabric, sew them together or lay them together wrong sides together, and sew all the way around them, and then leaving an opening, flip it out so that the right sides are out, press it really, really well, lay that yo-yo coverlet down on top of it, and hand stitch in the middle of every single one of those yo-yos with a tying, like you tie a quilt with an embroidery floss or something. And that kind of gives you a backing that supports that yo-yo quilt. And you don't have to put a binding or anything like that on it because it's already got finished edges. That is the only way I've ever seen a yo-yo quilt, quote unquote, finished, other than just the yo-yos sewn together. I had a vintage yo-yo quilt for years that I loved. It was on the back of my quilt, and that's all it was yo-yo sewn together. There is no batting and backing for yo-yo quilts.
Well, if it was close enough to go get it, I would get it and show you. But my sister actually made me a yo-yo quilt, and she finished it exactly the same way you just said. And the yo-yos are actually stitched onto this fabric. Well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Perfect. So, all right, we have time for one last question here. And this says, I'm returning to sewing and quilt piecing after about 15 unproductive years. I always get stalled when picking fabrics that look good together for a quilt. Can you offer me any guidelines to help make better decisions?
Yes. Here's my what I always say is when you're shopping for the fabric, go in and pick out one fabric that you really, really love. Just love that fabric. You love the design, you love the colors, you love everything about it. And it's got lots of motif, lots of design or whatever on it. Then you choose two coordinating fabrics that go with that fabric that have several of the colors that are in that fabric. But make sure that they're doing something totally different than that fabric. So let's say that fabric is big, big flowers, big flowers all over it. So, and the flowers are pink and purple and orange and yellow and red, but there's no greenery or anything like that. It's just all these bold, bold flowers. So then two fabrics that kind of repeat its colors. So I'm going to try to find something that has as many of those colors as possible, but maybe it's a stripe. And then I'm going to try to find something that has as many of those colors as possible, and maybe it's little polka dots. And then I'm going to find fabrics that repeat those colors separately. I'm going to find a purple, I'm going to find an orange, I'm going to find a yellow, I'm going to find a red, and I want each of those to be doing something different. One has light purple leaves on it, one has the orange has a darker orange swirl on it, whatever. They're tone on tones. And I'm going to have at least 5 of those so that I have at least 8 different fabrics, because I think that anything less than 8 makes a boring quilt. I hate to say that, but I just do. I really think that anything less than 12 makes a boring quilt. And I really think anything less than 20 is not all that great. I like a lot of variety of fabrics in my quilts. So, but you want those that one star fabric. I don't mean it has stars printed on it. I mean, it's the star of the show. And then you want the supporting, the supporting actor. So, you know, if you're watching a movie, there's usually the star, female star, the male star, and then there's the male supporting actor and the female supporting actor. And then there's the whole supporting cast. And that's all those plain people whose names you don't even recognize them, and you don't remember seeing them before, but they're doing all those roles that are really, really important, because the star couldn't be the star without those supporting roles. So, you know, that one grabber fabric, the 2 that kind of hold it up and make it look fabulous, and then all those little supporting minions that make everything else work. The more colors that are present in a fabric, the less useful that fabric is. The less colors that are present in a fabric, the more useful that fabric is. So tone on tones are the backbone of quilts. Then it comes to variety of visual texture. You want to make sure that you have an interest there. So hopefully that helps.
Absolutely. If not, it gives her a place to start. So perfect. All right. I want to thank you so much for being here to answer all of our questions this month. And
thanks for having me yet again.
Of course. And we'll have you back again next month to answer even more.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Of course. Hope everyone has a good night.